150 stories of glass and steel. 5,000 lives. An indestructible foundation that is currently turning into liquid sand. The Zenith Tower was supposed to be the safest building on Earth, a fortress where the AI Vortex 1 calculated every gust of wind. But while the monitors showed a perfect 100% stability, a wild barn owl named NYX heard something no machine could, the sound of a primary support pylon snapping like a toothpick. This is the story of the bird who had to scream down a skyscraper before the desert swallowed it whole. The Skyfall, the barn owl who heard the wind snap. Chapter 1, The Glass Needle. The Zenith Tower was a vertical city, a 150-story monument of glass and steel standing in the heart of the Mojave Desert. It was designed to be the ultimate sanctuary, a climate-controlled paradise where humanity could thrive despite the blistering heat of the desert plains. For the 5,000 residents inside, the tower was a symbol of total victory over a hostile environment. Built with a revolutionary aerodynamic skeleton, the building was meant to be flexible. Its core was a complex system of counterweights and shifting steel joints that allowed the tower to sway and breathe with the wind. The developers marketed it as the world's first indestructible skyscraper, claiming it could withstand a Category 5 hurricane or a seismic event of historic proportions without a single crack. Inside the luxury penthouses, the desert sun was filtered through smart tinted glass that kept the interior at a perfect 72 degrees. The residents looked out at the horizon with a sense of untouchable superiority. To them, the desert was merely a beautiful, dangerous painting that stayed safely on the other side of the window. They lived in a bubble of technology where the weather was an aesthetic choice, not a threat. At the base of the tower, a hidden army of servers hummed with the power of a Vortex 1, the tower's central AI. This intelligence was the building's brain, processing millions of data points per second from external wind vanes and internal stress sensors. It adjusted the tower's center of gravity in real time, making the residents feel as though they were standing on solid bedrock, even during a storm. On this particular evening, a massive Haboob, a wall of sand and wind a mile high, was visible on the horizon, glowing a deep, bruised purple. The storm was a monster of nature, but the engineers in the control room were calm. They had run the simulations 1,000 times. The Zenith was designed for this. They poured their coffee and settled in to watch the display, trusting their silicon sentinel to protect them. The guests gathered in the observation lounge, clinking glasses and preparing for a front-row seat to the storm's fury. They were the elite of the world, convinced that they had finally built a home that nature could not touch. But beneath the polished marble floors and the high-tech sensors, the Earth was preparing a betrayal that no one, not even the brilliant Vortex 1, had anticipated. The desert was not just a surface, it was a living, shifting ocean of sand. Beneath the Zenith lay a prehistoric aquifer, long since dried into a hollow pocket of unstable silt. As the storm approached, the pressure change was causing that pocket to collapse. The foundation was no longer sitting on rock, it was sitting on a void, and the glass needle was about to lose its thread. Chapter 2, The Sound of the Snap. While the humans watched the sky, NYX, a snow-white barn owl with a face like a porcelain mask, was focused on the Earth. NYX had claimed the Zenith's highest construction crane as her hunting perch, a vantage point that allowed her to see for miles. But NYX's greatest gift wasn't her sight, it was her hearing. Her facial disc acted as a biological radar, capturing sounds far beyond the range of any human ear. As the Sandstorm's leading edge hit the tower, the wind began to howl in a terrifying, discordant key. To the residents, it was just noise. To NYX, it was a complex map of structural health. She didn't hear the wind hitting the glass, she heard the metal beneath the skin. She heard the microscopic ping of high-tension bolts stretching to their limit, a sound that resonated through the steel like a dying bell. Deep within the tower's sub-basement, 100 feet below the lobby, the primary support pylon was under immense pressure. Because the ground had begun to liquefy due to the shifting sand, the pylon was twisting in a way it was never designed to. NYX's ears twitched. She caught a sudden, sharp crack, the sound of a 2-ton steel bolt shearing off under the weight of 150 stories. To an owl, sound is survival. That single snap was the heartbeat of a disaster. NYX felt the vibration through her talons as it traveled up the tower's skeleton. The building was no longer a solid object, it was a living thing in pain. The frequency of the tower had changed from a steady hum to a jagged, unstable vibration that signaled a terminal failure. NYX began to pace the crane's arm, her wings fluttering in agitation. She could hear the scream of the steel cables as they took on the load of the failed pylon. It was a high-pitched, metallic singing that grew louder with every gust of wind. The tower was leaning, only by a fraction of a millimeter, but to NYX's internal level, the world was already tilting toward the grave. The storm was now upon them, sandblasting against the windows with the force of 1,000,000 tiny hammers. The humans were cheering at the spectacle, filming the dust clouds with their phones. NYX let out a sharp, rasping shriek, a sound of primal alarm. She knew that the indestructible tower was hollow at its core, and the desert was preparing to swallow the needle whole. She launched herself into the gale, her white feathers disappearing into the brown haze. She didn't fly away to safety, she flew at the tower. She had watched the pack of humans enter and exit this hollow rock for months, and her instincts told her that the pack was about to be crushed. The bird who lived in the sky was the only one who knew the ground was gone. Chapter 3: The Ghost in the AI. Inside the Zenith's command center, the screens were a sea of calming blue. Vortex 1 was working at maximum capacity, shifting the massive 600-ton lead counterweight at the top of the tower to offset the 120 miles per hour wind gusts. Structural integrity, 100%, the main monitor read in bold, confident letters. The engineers congratulated themselves on the building's performance, oblivious to the void growing beneath them. The AI had a fatal blind spot, it was programmed to solve for wind pressure, not ground subsidence. All of its sensors were located in the upper 140 floors, measuring the sway and the drift. Because the entire building was sinking as a single unit into the sand, the internal strain sensors weren't detecting a bend. The AI saw a building that was standing perfectly straight, even as it descended into the earth. This was the ghost in the machine. The software was performing exactly as written, but the reality was outside its code. The building was tilting by a fraction of a degree every minute, but Vortex 1 was simply correcting the tilt by moving the counterweights, inadvertently putting even more pressure on the failing southern pylon. The machine was helping the desert pull the tower down. NYX reached the observation deck, her body a white blur against the darkness. She slammed her talons against the reinforced glass, her screeching audible even through the soundproofing. A security guard saw her and laughed, thinking the bird was just terrified by the storm. He didn't see the desperation in her eyes, he didn't notice that she was targeting the external anemometers, the eyes of the AI. The owl began to tear at the delicate wind vane sensors, her powerful beak snapping the carbon fiber blades. Suddenly, the data feed to Vortex 1 became unreliable. The screen in the command center flickered from blue to amber. Sensor malfunction in Sector A, a computerized voice announced. The engineers frowned, confused by the sudden loss of data. It's probably just debris from the storm, the lead engineer said. But NYX wasn't finished. She flew down to the 50th floor, where the primary external counterweight rail was exposed. She jammed a piece of storm-blown metal, a scrap she had scavenged from the crane, into the track. As the 600-ton weight tried to move, it hit the obstruction with a bone-shaking thud that vibrated through every floor of the tower. That thud was the first time the humans felt the reality of their situation. It wasn't a gentle sway, it was a violent, mechanical jolt. The safest indicators on the monitors finally turned a deep, blood red. The AI went into a logic conflict loop and shut down. For the first time since the Zenith was built, the humans were in control of a 150-story tower that was no longer standing on solid ground. Chapter 4: The Midnight Screech. The silence that followed the Ares shutdown was more terrifying than the storm. Without the counterweights to balance the load, the Zenith began to moan. It was a deep, guttural sound that seemed to come from the very soul of the building. The residents in the lounge stopped clinking their glasses. They felt a sickening, slow-motion slide in their stomachs, the feeling of a floor that was no longer level. NYX perched on the railing of the observation deck, staring directly through the glass at the head engineer, who had rushed upstairs to see what was happening. She didn't look like a bird anymore, she looked like a sentinel of fate. She let out a final, ear-piercing screech and dove toward the desert floor, her wings pointing toward the south foundation like an arrow. The engineer looked down at his feet. He dropped a marble on the floor, and watched in horror as it didn't just roll, it accelerated toward the southern wall. "The foundation," he whispered, his face turning the color of ash. "The southern pylon hasn't just failed, it's gone." He realized that the glitchy bird hadn't been attacking the building, she had been trying to kill the lying machine. He grabbed the emergency radio. "All floors. This is a code red. Total structural compromise. Evacuate the southern stairwells immediately. Move to the northeast emergency exits." His voice cracked with the weight of 5,000 lives. The calm, climate-controlled paradise turned into a frantic hive of panic as the residents realized their glass needle was about to snap. NYX circled the base of the tower, her white wings acting as a ghostly guide through the swirling sand. She knew the safe paths where the sand was still packed hard. As the thousands of residents poured out of the emergency exits, they saw the owl through the dust, hovering over the only stable ridge of rock in the area. They followed the white light of her feathers, running for their lives. The building gave a final, agonizing groan. The secondary cables snapped one by one, sounding like a firing squad in the dark. The top of the tower began to whip back and forth without the counterweights to catch it. NYX stayed in the air, her wings beating against the 120 miles per hour gusts, a living anchor for the thousands of terrified humans fleeing into the desert. The head engineer was the last one out, diving through the lobby doors just as the marble floor buckled upward. He looked back and saw the zenith tower tilting at an impossible angle. It looked like a giant trying to stand on one leg in a hurricane. He looked up and saw NYX, perched on a single piece of rock, her eyes fixed on the tower as the desert prepared to take it back. Chapter 5: The Sand's Embrace. The Haboob reached its peak, a wall of sand that swallowed the tower and the survivors alike. From their huddle on the rocky ridge, the residents of the zenith watched as their world was erased. The 150-story needle, the pinnacle of human achievement, began its final descent. It didn't fall over like a tree, it subsided, sinking vertically into the liquefied sand with a roar that drowned out the storm. The sound was like a mountain being ground into dust. The glass windows, designed to be indestructible, imploded under the pressure of the falling structure. A massive cloud of pulverized concrete and desert silt erupted into the air, a final exhale from a building that had been too proud to listen to the earth. In less than 2 minutes, the zenith tower was gone, reduced to a heap of twisted metal and broken dreams. The sandstorm began to move on, leaving behind a new landscape. Where the tower had once pierced the sky, there was now only a jagged mound of debris already being covered by the shifting dunes. The indestructible aerodynamic skeleton was twisted into knots, buried in the very void that the AI had refused to acknowledge. The desert had won, and it had done so in total silence. The survivors stood in the eerie, post-storm quiet, their faces covered in dust. They looked at each other, 5,000 people who were alive only because of a glitch in the system and a bird that wouldn't stop screaming. They realized that their high-tech fortress had been a cage, and that a nuisance owl had been their only true protector. NYX resurfaced from the dust, her white feathers now stained a dull brown by the sand. She didn't stay to be thanked. She flew over the ruins once, her keen eyes checking for any movement in the rubble, any member of the pack that might be left behind. Finding none, she banked hard to the west, heading back toward the mountains where the ground was made of stone, not lies. The engineers stood by their emergency kits, looking at their useless tablets. The vortex of one software was gone, buried under 1,000,000 tons of desert. They had all the data in the world, but they had lacked the wisdom to hear the wind snap. They had built a city in the sky, but they had forgotten that life begins and ends on the ground. As the first light of dawn hit the Mojave, the survivors began their long walk toward the nearest highway. They walked in a long, silent line, 5,000 people humbled by the earth. Every few minutes, someone would look up at the sky, searching for a flash of white wings. They knew that skyfall was over, but they would never look at a bird or a building the same way again. Chapter 6: The Silent Guardian. The investigation into the Zenith collapse lasted for years. It became the textbook case for the anthropogenic blind spot, the tendency for humans to trust their digital models over biological reality. The developers were sued into bankruptcy, and the Mojave Aquifer was declared a protected zone, off-limits for future construction. The desert was allowed to take back what was hers. The story of NYX became a legend of the modern world. She was the white ghost of the Mojave, the bird who saw the unseen. Biologists studied the fluid resonance of her hearing, trying to figure out how she had detected the structural failure before the sensors did. But the survivors didn't need science to explain it. They knew that NYX hadn't been calculating, she had been caring. A small memorial was eventually built near the site, not a skyscraper, but a simple, low-lying circle of stones. In the center stood a bronze statue of a barn owl, her wings spread as if to catch the wind. The inscription read, "For the one who heard what we were too loud to notice." It became a place of pilgrimage for those who wanted to remember the night the needle broke. The Mojave Desert is quiet now, the dunes slowly erasing the last traces of the Zenith's foundation. But if you go there during a sandstorm, the locals say you can still hear a high-pitched screech above the wind. They say this white ghost still patrols the plains, her eyes and ears open to the shifting of the earth, waiting for the next time humanity forgets that nature always has the final word. NYX herself lived for many more years, a matriarch of the desert sky. She raised generations of owlets on the rocky cliffs of the mountains, teaching them the language of the wind and the secrets of the stone. She remained a creature of instinct, a living proof that the most powerful early warning system in the world doesn't need a battery or a server, it only needs a heart. The story of the Skyfall is a reminder for a world that is moving faster and building higher every day. It tells us that we must never become so quieted by our own technology that we lose the ability to hear the world around us. As long as there are guardians like NYX watching the sky, there is hope for those of us who live on the ground. Every hero has a heartbeat, and some heroes have wings. If NYX's bravery reminded you that nature is the ultimate engineer, don't let her story end here. Share this legend with those who trust their screens more than the wind. Because in the end, it's not the height of our towers that defines us, but our ability to listen when the earth begins to speak. The higher we build, the further we have to fall. If NYX's warning gave you chills, join our community of watchers. Smash that like button to honor NYX and the guardians of the desert sky. Subscribe to Pause That Saved Lives, where we bring you the most thrilling and dramatic cinematic legends of nature's heroes. Comment NYX below to let us know, would you trust an Ari's data or an owl's instinct?